The crystalline walls of the Zephyrian command vessel hummed with an energy that made Jake Morrison's teeth ache. He'd been warned about this during his briefing on Earth Station 7, but experiencing it firsthand was like having a tuning fork lodged in his skull. The ambassador's handbook had failed to mention that alien architecture could literally give you a headache. "Breathe through your nose," he muttered to himself, clutching his diplomatic case tighter as he followed the escort down a corridor that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent veins. The walls weren't just glowing, they were alive, and apparently in a very good mood. The light patterns shifted from deep blue to cheerful amber as they walked, which either meant the ship was welcoming him or preparing to digest him. Given his track record with first contact situations, either option seemed plausible. His escort, a tall Zephyrian with ears so elegantly pointed they could probably pick up radio signals from distant galaxies, glided ahead without speaking. The silence was beginning to feel oppressive when Jake decided to break it with what he hoped was universal small talk. "Nice ship you've got here. Very organic." The escort's ear tips twitched, which Jake's crash course in Zephyrian body language suggested was either amusement or mild offense. 50-50 odds were better than his usual diplomatic performance. "The vessel Meridian's Grace has served the royal fleet for 3 centuries, the escort replied in accented but perfect standard. "She is considered quite beautiful by our standards." "She?" Jake glanced at the pulsing walls. "The ship is alive. All Zephyrian vessels are symbiotic organisms. Meridian's Grace has been bonded to the royal bloodline since Queen Lyriletha's great-grandmother first took the throne." Jake nodded sagely, as if living spaceships were a perfectly normal Tuesday occurrence. "Right. Of course. I suppose that explains the humming." "The humming? You don't hear that?" Jake paused, realizing he might have just admitted to hearing voices. In his head. On an alien ship. This was going well. Never mind. Probably just the artificial gravity acting up. The escort's ears drooped slightly. "I shall inform the maintenance staff immediately. We cannot have our honored guest experiencing discomfort." No, it's fine. Really. I like humming. Very musical." Jake winced as his voice cracked on the last word. 37 years old and he still couldn't lie convincingly under pressure. They emerged into a vast chamber that defied several laws of physics Jake was pretty sure still applied in this part of the galaxy. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into a misty aurora of swirling colors, while the floor was a transparent surface that revealed the starfield rushing past below. Standing in the center of this cosmic snow globe was Queen Lyrileth herself. Jake had seen holographic recordings during his briefings, but they hadn't captured the sheer presence of her. She stood nearly as tall as he did, her silver hair cascading past shoulders draped in what looked like liquid starlight. Her ears, longer and more gracefully curved than her escort's, were adorned with chains of some crystalline material that chimed softly with her movements. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, ancient and amused, as if she'd been expecting him specifically and found the whole situation delightfully entertaining. "Ambassador Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that seemed characteristic of her species. "Welcome aboard Meridian's Grace. I trust your journey was pleasant." "Your Majesty." Jake managed what he hoped was an appropriately respectful bow. "The journey was educational. Thank you for agreeing to these negotiations. How could I refuse? It is not often we encounter a species bold enough to request an audience with the Zephyrian Empire while simultaneously offering to bring their own snacks." Jake blinked. "Excuse me." Queen Lyrileth gestured to a nearby attendant, who produced Jake's diplomatic case and opened it to reveal, among other official documents, a package of Earth-manufactured protein bars and a thermos of coffee. "Your advance team assured us these were essential diplomatic supplies," the Queen continued, her expression perfectly serious despite the obvious glint of mischief in her eyes. Jake felt heat rising in his cheeks. That was a miscommunication. Emergency rations, in case the food replicators weren't compatible with human dietary requirements. How wonderfully practical. And what? The Queen lifted a small wrapped bar. Is this chocolate chip cookie dough blast? Exactly. Diabetes in a wrapper, mostly. The words escaped before Jake could stop them. Several court attendants gasped softly, their ears flattening in what he really hoped wasn't preparation for battle positions. Queen Lireleth stared at him for a moment that stretched like taffy, then threw back her head and laughed, a sound like silver bells in a wind chime. Diabetes. Oh, I must remember that one. The Elon, did you record that? A nervous-looking courtier with a tablet that appeared to be made of compressed light nodded rapidly. Yes, Your Majesty. Though I am uncertain of the translation. A human condition, Jake explained, relaxing slightly. Too much sugar. Makes you energetic. Then tired. Then possibly dead, if you're really committed to the lifestyle. Fascinating. And humans voluntarily consume substances that cause this condition. We call it living your best life, Your Majesty. The Queen's musical laughter filled the chamber again, and Jake noticed the walls around them shifting to warmer hues, as if the ship itself was enjoying the conversation. Several courtiers were still looking distinctly uncomfortable, however, particularly one elderly advisor whose ears had achieved a level of flatness that suggested he thought humor might be contagious. You know, the Queen said, settling onto what Jake now realized was a thrown groan from the ship's living material, when my scouts first reported on your species, they mentioned humans had an unusual relationship with danger. I assumed they meant your tendency toward warfare. We do have that tendency, Jake admitted. But we also invented deep-fried butter, so our relationship with danger is more comprehensive. Deep-fried butter, the Queen repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. I find myself both horrified and curious. That's the human condition in a nutshell, Your Majesty. From somewhere in the back of the assembled court, a small commotion arose. Jake turned to see a maintenance worker, definitely Zephyrian based on the ears, though these were noticeably shorter and bore what looked like old scars, trying to quietly fix some kind of wall panel while an irritated noble gestured for her to work faster. Careful with that coupling, the worker said sharply. Unless you want the artificial gravity to decide we're all birds. The noble's ears flushed deep purple. How dare you address me with such? With such accuracy, the worker replied, not looking up from her repairs. Because that's a primary gravitational stabilizer, and if I connect it wrong, we'll all be having this conversation while stuck to the ceiling. Jake found himself grinning despite the obvious tension. The worker's ears might be scarred, but her attitude was definitely intact. Queen Lireleth followed his gaze and sighed softly. Kira, she called out. Perhaps you could complete your repairs with less commentary. The worker, Kira, glanced up briefly, and Jake caught a glimpse of intelligent green eyes that held no deference whatsoever. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll be sure to work in complete silence while preventing us all from becoming decorative ceiling ornaments. Jake had been staring at the ceiling of his guest quarters for what felt like hours, though the ship's day-night cycle seemed to operate on principles that would have made Einstein weep. The bioluminescent panels above him pulsed in patterns that were probably beautiful if you weren't trying to sleep, but reminded him uncomfortably of the time he'd accidentally consumed expired sushi and spent the night watching his apartment walls breathe. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door, which was less a door and more a section of wall that occasionally remembered it was supposed to be permeable. Jake sat up, running fingers through hair that had apparently decided to stage a rebellion against Earth's standard gravity. Come in, he called, then immediately regretted it as the wall dissolved to reveal Queen Lireleth herself, flanked by what appeared to be her entire diplomatic corps. Ambassador Morrison, she said, gliding into the room with the kind of grace that suggested she'd never once walked into a coffee table in the dark. I hope you have rested well. Like a baby, Jake lied smoothly. A baby with severe insomnia and trust issues about walls that might eat me. The Queen's escort from yesterday, the Elon, Jake recalled, whispered something urgent in the Queen's elongated ear. Her expression shifted to something that might have been confusion or might have been constipation. With alien faces, it was hard to tell. Ambassador, I must confess that our translators have been working through the night to properly understand your cultural requirements. My cultural requirements? Yes. Our xenobiologists inform me that human courtship rituals are extraordinarily complex. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Courtship rituals. Indeed. Your rejection of the ceremonial protein bars, your casual dismissal of mortal danger, your obvious interest in our lower caste workers, clearly you are following some intricate mating protocol. Your Majesty, I think there's been a tremendous misunderstanding. Please, Queen Lireleth raised a hand adorned with rings that seemed to contain miniature galaxies. Do not insult my intelligence. Our research indicates that human males often employ something called playing hard to get as a romantic strategy. Jake opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, achieving a remarkable impression of a fish experiencing an existential crisis. Who exactly did this research? The Elon produced his light tablet and began reading in a tone that suggested he was quoting scripture. According to the human entertainment database we accessed from your communication networks, successful human courtship requires the male to initially reject all advances while demonstrating practical skills and concern for the disadvantaged. You've been watching Earth romantic comedies. Is that not how your species selects mates? The Queen leaned forward with genuine curiosity. The documentation was quite extensive. There were hundreds of examples. Your Majesty, those are fictional. Ah! The Queen's eyes lit up with triumph. You deny the evidence because you do not wish to appear too eager. This confirms the pattern exactly. Jake realized he was trapped in a conversation that had somehow become more surreal than the time he tried to explain baseball to a sentient cloud during the Proxima Centauri negotiations. Your Majesty, I assure you, I have no intention of courting anyone. I'm here strictly as a diplomatic representative. Of course you are. The Queen's smile could have powered a small star. The Elon, what was the next phase according to the human documentation? The female subject typically escalates her displays of worthiness while the male continues to demonstrate his suitability through increasingly elaborate gestures of indifference. Elaborate gestures of indifference, Jake repeated weakly. That's not actually a thing. Which is precisely what someone engaging in elaborate gestures of indifference would say, Queen Lireleth observed with the satisfaction of someone who just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. A sudden vibration ran through the ship, causing the walls to shift from their usual blue-green to an alarming shade of orange. Alarms began sounding, or rather, the ship began making distressed humming noises that sounded like a whale with a head cold. What's happening? Jake asked, grateful for any distraction from the worst case of mistaken intentions since Archduke Ferdinand decided to take a drive through Sarajevo. The Elon was frantically consulting his tablet while speaking rapidly into what appeared to be a crystalline earpiece. Gravitational fluctuation in the lower decks, Your Majesty. The maintenance staff reports a cascade failure in the primary stabilization matrix. How serious? The Queen demanded. Well, came a familiar voice from the corridor, unless you enjoy the thought of being pancaked against a bulkhead at roughly 3 times normal gravity, I'd say fairly serious. Kira appeared in the doorway, her scarred ears somehow managing to convey both urgency and exasperation. Her work coveralls were stained with what looked like luminescent oil, and she carried a toolkit that seemed to be held together by stubbornness and creative profanity. You shouldn't be in this section, the Elon said stiffly. The royal quarters are restricted to people who can actually fix the problem before we all become abstract art on the walls. Kira interrupted. Because right now, I'm the only one on this ship who knows how to recalibrate a sympathetic resonance cascade without turning us into cosmic paste. Another vibration shook the ship, this one strong enough to rattle Jake's teeth. Through the transparent floor panels, he could see the stars outside beginning to streak and blur as the ship's movement became increasingly erratic. What do you need? He asked Kira, ignoring the shocked gasps from the royal entourage. Someone with steady hands and no concern for their personal safety, she replied without hesitation. Plus someone who won't faint when they see what's actually keeping this ship from falling apart. I volunteer, Jake said immediately. Ambassador Morrison, the Queen protested, surely you cannot mean to. Your Majesty, with all due respect, I think your ship is more important than diplomatic protocol right now. Kira grinned, revealing teeth that were slightly sharper than human normal. I like him. He's got functioning brain cells. This is highly irregular, the Elon muttered, but his protests were drowned out by another groaning vibration that made the ceiling lights flicker ominously. Irregular beats dead, Kira pointed out cheerfully. Ambassador, can you handle crawling through maintenance shafts that may or may not be trying to digest you? Lady, I once had to negotiate a trade agreement while trapped in a malfunctioning escape pod with a Rigelian ambassador who kept molting, Jake replied. I think I can handle your maintenance shafts. Rigelians molt? Queen Lireleth asked with sudden interest. Only when stressed. It was like being trapped in a snow globe filled with scales and diplomatic immunity. Kira laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both musical and slightly unhinged. Oh, you're definitely coming with me. This is going to be fun. As they headed toward what Jake assumed was certain doom disguised as routine maintenance, he caught the Queen staring after them with an expression he couldn't quite read. The Elon, she said thoughtfully, perhaps our research into human courtship rituals was incomplete. Your Majesty. Make a note to study their apparent tendency toward collaborative problem-solving under stress. It seems to be quite attractive. Jake, unfortunately, was close enough to hear this and nearly tripped over his own feet. Behind him, Kira's laughter echoed down the corridor like the sound of someone who'd found the universe's best joke and decided to share it with everyone. The maintenance shaft turned out to be less shaft and more digestive tract of a very large, very confused animal. Jake found himself crawling through what felt like the inside of a kaleidoscope having an anxiety attack, with walls that pulsed in colors he was pretty sure didn't exist in normal spacetime. Don't touch the purple bits, Kira called back to him, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. They're sensitive. Sensitive how? Jake asked, then immediately regretted it as a section of wall near his elbow turned a distinctly annoyed shade of crimson. They hold grudges. Last month, Technician Vex accidentally sneezed on one and it refused to let him pass for 3 days. He had to live on recycled air and whatever snacks he had in his pockets. The ship can hold grudges. Oh yes. Meridian's Grace has the emotional maturity of a teenage drama queen. Very powerful, occasionally helpful, but absolutely convinced that everyone is either trying to hurt her or doesn't understand her properly. Jake paused in his crawling to consider this. So we're inside a giant, sentient, emotionally unstable teenager. Who also happens to be our only protection from the vacuum of space and certain death, yes. Try not to think about it too hard. They emerged into a chamber that defied every engineering principle Jake had ever learned. Crystalline conduits snaked through the air without visible support, pulsing with energy that made his fillings ache. In the center, a massive sphere of what looked like liquid light rotated slowly, occasionally sparking with rainbow-colored arcs of electricity. Right, Kira said, pulling tools from her kit that seemed to shift shape depending on which angle you viewed them from. That's the primary sympathetic resonance core. It's having what you might call a temper tantrum. What exactly does a sympathetic resonance core do? It keeps us from being turned inside out by our own gravity generators. Very important function. Highly recommend we fix it before it decides to take a permanent vacation. As if summoned by her words, the core gave an ominous flicker and the entire chamber tilted sideways. Jake found himself pressed against what had previously been a wall, his stomach attempting to relocate itself somewhere near his ears. Okay, that's new, Kira said with the sort of forced calm that suggested this was definitely not supposed to happen. Usually it just threatens to implode. The whole spatial reorganization thing is more of a weekend hobby. Can you fix it? Probably. The question is whether I can fix it before we end up scattered across several dimensions. Ambassador, I need you to hold that stabilizer steady while I recalibrate the resonance matrix. She pointed to what appeared to be a floating crystal that was currently spinning like a disco ball having a seizure. Jake reached for it cautiously, then yelped as his hand passed through empty space. It's not actually there, Kira explained helpfully. It exists about 3 inches to the left of where you see it. Spatial displacement field. Very advanced technology. Also very inconvenient for maintenance purposes. How do I grab something that's not where it appears to be? Feel for it. The ship will guide you if you let her. Jake closed his eyes and reached out again, trying to ignore the sensation that reality was being stirred with a cosmic spoon. His fingers brushed against something solid, and suddenly he could feel a thrumming energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Good. Now hold it steady while oh, you've got to be kidding me. Jake opened his eyes to see Kira staring at her toolkit in dismay. Half the tools had apparently decided to exist in different phases of matter, while the other half were floating serenely near the ceiling. Let me guess, Jake said. Also not supposed to happen. The ship's getting confused by having someone new touch her core systems. She's not sure if you're a threat or a potential partner, so she's basically flirting and preparing for battle simultaneously. That explains why I feel like I'm being simultaneously hugged and scanned for weapons. Welcome to Zephyrian biotechnology. Where the line between engineering and therapy is basically non-existent. A new voice crackled through the chamber's communication system, distorted but unmistakably belonging to Queen Lyrilleth. Ambassador Morrison, are you quite all right? Our sensors indicate some unusual, bonding activity. Bonding activity? Jake called back, still maintaining his grip on the invisible crystal. The ship appears to be attempting to integrate you into her neural network. This typically only occurs during intimate. Your Majesty, Kira interrupted loudly, perhaps we could discuss the ship's dating habits after we prevent her from accidentally ejecting us into a black hole. Of course. Carry on. Jake felt heat rising in his cheeks. Is there anything about this situation that isn't going to be misinterpreted as romantic? Probably not, Kira replied cheerfully, finally managing to snag one of her floating tools. But look on the bright side, if we survive this, you'll technically be blood brothers with a starship. That's got to be worth something on your diplomatic resume. The core suddenly pulsed brighter, and Jake felt a strange warmth spreading up his arms. Images flashed through his mind, vast star systems, the joy of flight between worlds, the loneliness of empty space, and underneath it all, a sense of curiosity about this strange new creature touching her heart. She likes you, Kira observed, watching the chamber's lighting shift to warmer tones. Usually takes her months to warm up to new people. You must have made quite an impression. I haven't done anything special. You volunteered to help fix her when you could have stayed safe in your quarters. Trust me, Meridian's grace remembers acts of kindness. As Kira worked, Jake found himself oddly moved by the ship's obvious loneliness. Here was a creature capable of crossing the galaxy, host to thousands of beings, and yet isolated by her very nature from the life she carried. Does she have friends? He asked. Other ships like her? A few. But they're scattered across the Empire. Most of the time, she only gets to interact with other vessels during formal ceremonies or military operations. Not exactly conducive to casual conversation. That sounds terrible. Yeah, well, that's the price of being unique and powerful. People tend to put you on a pedestal and forget you might want someone to talk to. Jake caught something in her tone that suggested she might not be talking entirely about the ship. Before he could pursue the thought, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. What now? He asked. Kira's ears flattened as she listened to the rapid chatter from her comm unit. Hostile ships detected at the edge of the system. 3 vessels, unknown configuration, approaching fast. Hostile how? The kind of hostile where they're actively charging weapons and broadcasting surrender demands in 17 different languages. The chamber shuddered as Meridian's grace began evasive maneuvers, and Jake felt the ship's mood shift from curiosity to grim determination through their strange connection. Can we finish the repairs in time? Maybe. If the ship cooperates and nobody else decides to have an emotional breakdown in the next 10 minutes. From the comm system, Queen Lyriletha's voice rang out again, now addressing the entire ship. All personnel to battle stations. Prepare for defensive maneuvers. Battle stations, Jake muttered. Just once, I'd like a diplomatic mission that doesn't end with someone shooting at me. Where's the fun in that? Kira grinned, her scarred ears somehow managing to convey mischief despite the dire circumstances. Besides, you haven't lived until you've experienced ship-to-ship combat from inside the target's nervous system. Jake was beginning to suspect that his definition of living and the Zephyrian definition were going to require some serious diplomatic negotiation. The hostile ships arrived with all the subtlety of a supernova at a candlelight dinner. Through his strange connection with Meridian's grace, Jake could feel the vessel's distress as enemy fire began testing her shields, each impact like a sharp poke to an already anxious nervous system. How's that repair coming? He called to Kira, who was now hanging upside down from a crystalline support beam, tools scattered around her like metallic confetti. Almost there. Just need to. She was cut off as another blast rocked the ship, sending her toolkit flying in directions that shouldn't have been physically possible. Okay, that's definitely not helping my concentration. Through the ship's communication system, Jake could hear the chaos on the bridge, shouted orders, the high-pitched whine of charging weapons, and underneath it all, Queen Lyriletha's voice trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic protocol while people were actively trying to kill them. Unknown vessels, this is Queen Lyriletha of the Zephyrian Empire. State your intentions. The response came back in heavily accented standard, surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded. Your diplomatic immunity has been revoked by the authority of free systems. The authority of what now? Jake asked. Separatist faction, Kira explained, finally managing to wrangle her primary calibration tool back into normal spacetime. They think the Empire's too cozy with alien species. Particularly humans, apparently. Oh good. So this is partially my fault. Only partially. They've been looking for an excuse to start trouble for months. Your romantic comedy situation with the Queen just gave them the opening they needed. Another blast shook the chamber, and Jake felt Meridian's Grace's frustration spike through their connection. The ship wanted to fight back, but her weapon systems were designed for space battles, not close-quarters combat with her own gravitational field compromised. There. Kira shouted triumphantly as the resonance core suddenly stabilized, its chaotic spinning settling into a smooth rotation. Gravity should be back to normal in 3, 2. The chamber lurched violently as orientation reasserted itself, and Jake found himself briefly experiencing what it might feel like to be a sock in a particularly aggressive washing machine. 1. Kira finished weakly from where she'd landed in a heap near the wall. Kira, Ambassador Morrison, Queen Lyriletha's voice crackled through the comm, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation. More of a situation than people shooting at us? Jake asked. Apparently so. They made their way through corridors that were now thankfully oriented in the correct direction, though the ship's bioluminescent walls were flashing between colors so rapidly that Jake was starting to feel like he was inside a very large, very stressed mood ring. The bridge was chaos. Noble officers clustered around holographic displays, arguing loudly about tactical options while completely ignoring the practical crew members who actually knew how the ship's systems worked. In the center of it all, Queen Lyrileth stood with the sort of regal composure that suggested she was mentally adding everyone's names to a very long list. Ah, Ambassador Morrison, she said as they approached. Perfect timing. The Separatists have just made their demands more specific. How specific? Captain, Jake began before anyone could object, I understand you have concerns about human influence on Zephyrian culture. You understand nothing, alien. Your very presence corrupts the natural order. See, that's where you're wrong. I'm not here to change anything. I'm here because I was curious about your people, and what I found was pretty amazing. The captain's expression shifted to confusion. Amazing? You've got living ships that can cross the galaxy, a social structure that's lasted centuries, and technology that makes our best efforts look like stone knives. But you know what really impressed me? What? The question came out almost involuntarily. The fact that when your ship was in danger, everyone worked together to fix it. Noble, maintenance worker, alien diplomat, didn't matter. What mattered was keeping everyone safe. Jake could see Kira grinning in his peripheral vision, and even some of the bridge officers were beginning to look thoughtful. Your Majesty, he continued, turning to Queen Lireleth, I have a confession to make. The Queen raised an eyebrow. Oh. I'm not following any human courtship rituals. I never was. The truth is, I was impressed by someone who cared more about doing the right thing than following protocol. Someone who risked their position to speak honestly, who knew how to fix problems instead of just complaining about them. He looked directly at Kira, whose scarred ears had flushed a delicate shade of pink. Someone who taught me that sometimes the most important people are the ones everyone else overlooks. The bridge had gone completely silent. Even the separatist captain seemed frozen, waiting to see where this was going. Your Majesty, Jake said formally, I respectfully decline your offer of, well, yourself. Not because I don't appreciate the honor, but because I've learned that true connection isn't about status or power. It's about finding someone who challenges you to be better than you thought you could be. Queen Lireleth smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Jake saw genuine warmth instead of royal performance. And have you found such a person, Ambassador Morrison? Jake looked at Kira again, seeing the intelligence in her green eyes, the strength in her scarred ears, the gentle humor that had carried them through impossible situations. I'd like the chance to find out, Your Majesty. If she's interested. You do realize, Kira said, stepping forward with a grin that could have powered the ship's engines, that I'm technically unemployed, socially outcast, and have a tendency to argue with authority figures. Sounds perfect, Jake replied. I'm diplomatically immune, culturally confused, and apparently capable of starting interstellar incidents just by being polite. The separatist captain cleared his throat loudly. This is all very touching, but we still have our demands. Actually, Queen Lireleth said, her royal authority returning in full force, I believe your demands have just been rendered obsolete. The ambassador has clearly chosen to embrace Zephyrian values of merit over hierarchy, practical wisdom over empty protocol. If that's corruption, then perhaps our culture needed corrupting. She turned to address her bridge crew. Effective immediately, ship assignments will be based on competence rather than caste. Starting with our new chief engineer. Kira's eyes went wide. Your Majesty, You just saved this ship and everyone on it. I think that qualifies you for the position, don't you? The separatist captain was looking increasingly bewildered. But, the natural order. The natural order, Jake said gently, is that the people best suited for a job should be the ones doing it. Your Majesty has just demonstrated that principle perfectly. After a long moment, the separatist captain's ears drooped in defeat. This is not what we expected. The best diplomatic solutions usually aren't, Jake replied. The good news is, nobody has to die today, and everyone gets to go home with a story about the time an alien diplomat accidentally revolutionized Zephyrian society by falling for the maintenance crew. As the separatist ships powered down their weapons and began to withdraw, Jake felt Meridian's Grace's contentment flowing through their connection. The ship was happy, her crew was safe, and the future suddenly seemed full of interesting possibilities. So, Kira said, moving to stand beside him as they watched the tactical display, think you'll like living on a spaceship? With you as my tour guide? I'm looking forward to it. Queen Lireleth cleared her throat delicately. I do hope you realize, Ambassador, that this arrangement will require extensive, cultural exchange negotiations. Jake grinned, finally understanding that sometimes the best diplomatic victories were the ones that changed everyone involved. Your Majesty, I wouldn't have it any other way.